Okay, let's have it.
Ladies and gentlemen, as most of you now know, a U-2 flying over Cuba Sunday morning took a series of disturbing photographs. Our analysis at NPIC indicates the Soviet Union has followed up its conventional weapons buildup in Cuba with the introduction of surface-to-surface medium-range ballistic missiles, or MRBMs. Our official estimate at this time is that this missile system is the SS-4 Sandow. We do not believe that the missiles are yet as operational, but Ironbark reports that the SS-24 can deliver a 3-megaton nuclear weapon 1,000 miles. So far, we have identified 34 missiles, serviced by about 3,400 men, undoubtedly all Soviet men and personnel. Our cities and military installations in the southeast, as far north as Washington, D.C., are in range of these weapons. In the event of a launch, we would only have 5 minutes of warning.
5 minutes, everyone.
In those 5 minutes, it could kill 80 million Americans and destroy a significant percentage of our bomber bases, degrading our retaliatory options. The Joint Chiefs consensus, Mr. President, is that this signals a major doctrinal shift in Soviet thinking to a first-rate policy. It is a massively destabilizing move.
How long until they are operational?
GMAC, Guided Missiles Intelligence Committee, estimates 10 to 14 days. A crash program can limit that time. However, I must stress that there may be more missiles that we don't know about. We need more U-2 coverage.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want first reactions here. Assuming that Khrushchev hasn't gone off the deep end and intends to start World War III, what are we looking at here?
Well, Mr. President, I believe that my team is in agreement. If we permit the introduction of nuclear missiles to a Soviet satellite nation in our hemisphere, the diplomatic consequences would be too terrible to contemplate. The Russians are trying to show the world that they can do whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want, and we're powerless to stop them. If they succeed,
It'll be Munich all over again.
yes, appeasement only makes the aggressor more aggressive, and the Soviets will be emboldened to push us even harder. Now we must remove the missiles one way or another. It seems to me that the opinions are either some combination of international pressure and action on our part until they give in, or we hit them an airstrike.
We worked up several military scenarios. Before I asked General Taylor to take us through the various options, I'd like for us to adopt a rule. If we decide to strike, we must agree now to do it before the missiles become optional, because once they are, I don't think we can guarantee getting them all before at least some of them are launched.
Well, it's clear we cannot allow Soviet missiles in Cuba. We have to get those missiles out. What business do you have here?
Mr. President, I have a peace proposal. Now I know most of these fellows will consider me a coward for the rest of my life for what I'm about to say today, but perhaps we need a coward in the room when we are talking about a nuclear war. Because if not, war is going to break out, and part of the United States and the United Nations, I have come up with a solution, an ultimate for the Soviets.
Alright, keep talking.
We should make an exchange with the Soviets.
An exchange?
Yes, now just hear me out. We need to tell Khrushchev that if they just remove the Soviet missiles from Cuba, the United States will agree to remove its obsolete Jupiter missiles from Turkey.
We cannot just give in to Soviet pressure. What will that make of America?
Mr. President, it's our smartest decision. Invasion, airstrike, military forces, it will all lead to full-scale nuclear war. This will result in more than 100 million Americans dead. Even more Soviets will need to handle this peacefully. Mr. President, take my proposal into consideration. Think it over and get back to me.
Three, two, one, you're on.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. Upon receiving the first preliminary hard information of this nature last Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., I directed that our surveillance be stepped up. And having now confirmed and completed our evaluation of the evidence and our decision on the course of action, this government feels obliged to report this new crisis to you in fullest detail. The characteristics of these new missile sites indicate two distinct types of installations. Several of them include medium-range ballistic missiles capable of carrying a nuclear warhead for a distance of more than 1,000 nautical miles. Each of these missiles, in short, is capable of striking Washington, D.C., the Panama Canal, Cape Canaveral, Mexico City, or any other city in the southeastern part of the United States, in Central America, or in the Caribbean. This urgent transformation of Cuba into an important strategic base by the presence of these large, long-range, and clearly offensive weapons of sudden mass destruction constitutes an explicit threat to the peace and security of all the Americas. This action also contradicts the repeated assurances of Soviet spokesmen, both publicly and privately delivered, that the arms buildup in Cuba would retain its original defensive character, and that the Soviet Union had no need or desire to station strategic missiles on the territory of any other nation. We no longer live in a world where only the actual firing of weapons represents a sufficient challenge to the nation's security to constitute maximum peril. Nuclear weapons are so destructive and ballistic missiles are so swift that any substantially increased possibility of their use or any sudden change in their deployment may well be regarded as a definite threat to peace. But this secret, swift, and extraordinary buildup of communist missiles in an area well known to have a special and historical relationship to the United States and the nations of the Western Hemisphere, in violation of Soviet assurances and in defiance of American and hemispheric policy, the sudden decision to station strategic weapons for the first time outside the Soviet soil is a deliberate, provocative, and unjustified change in the status quo, which cannot be accepted. If our courage and our commitments are ever to be trusted again by either friend or foe. The 1930s taught us a clear lesson. Aggressive conduct, if allowed to go unchecked and unchallenged, ultimately leads to war. This nation is opposed to war. We're also true to our word. Our unswerving objective, therefore, must be to prevent the use of these missiles against this or any other country, and to secure their withdrawal or elimination from the Western Hemisphere. Our policy has been one of patience and restraint, as befits a peaceful and powerful nation, which leads a worldwide alliance. But now further action is required, and it is underway. And these actions may only be the beginning. We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the costs of worldwide nuclear war, in which even the fruits of victory would be the ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk at any time it must be faced. Acting, therefore, in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. First, to halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. This quarantine will be extended, if needed, to other types of cargo and carriers. We are not at this time, however, denying the necessities of life, as the Soviets attempted doing in their Berlin blockade of 1948. Second, I have directed the continued and increased close surveillance of Cuba and its military buildup. Should these offensive military preparations continue, thus increasing the threat to the hemisphere, further action will be justified. I have directed the armed forces to prepare for any eventualities, and I entrust that in the interest of both the Cuban people and the Soviet technicians at the sites, the hazards to all concerned in continuing this threat will be recognized. Third, It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Fourth, as a necessary military precaution, I have reinforced our base at Guantanamo, evacuated today the dependents of our personnel there, and ordered additional military units to be on a standby alert basis. Fifth, we are calling tonight for an immediate meeting of the organ of consultation under the Organization of American States to consider this threat to hemispheric security and to invoke Articles 6 and 8 of the Rio Treaty in support of all necessary action. The United Nations Charter allows for regional security arrangements, and the nations of this hemisphere decided long ago against the military presence of outside powers. Our other allies around the world have also been alerted. Sixth, under the Charter of the United Nations, we are asking tonight that an emergency meeting of the Security Council be convoked without delay to take action against the latest Soviet threat to world peace. Our resolution will call for a prompt dismantling and withdrawal of all offensive weapons in Cuba, under the supervision of UN observers, before the quarantine can be lifted. Seventh and finally, I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in an historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man. He has an opportunity now to move the world back from the abyss of destruction. This nation is prepared to present its case against the Soviet threat to peace and our own proposals for a peaceful world, at any time and in any forum, without limiting our freedom of action. We have in the past made strenuous efforts to limit the spread of nuclear weapons. We have proposed the elimination of all arms and military bases in a fair and effective disarmament treaty. We are prepared to discuss new proposals for the removal of tensions on both sides, including the possibility of a genuinely independent Cuba, free to determine its own destiny. We have no wish for war with the Soviet Union, for we are a peaceful people who desire to live in peace with all other peoples. But it is difficult to settle or even discuss these problems in an atmosphere of intimidation. That is why this latest Soviet threat must and will be met with determination. Any hostile move anywhere in the world against the safety and freedom of peoples to whom we are committed, including in particular the brave people of West Berlin, will be met with whatever action is needed.
Tell my men to call off the ships.